It is my proud privilege and delight to introduce Reverend Dr. Father K.J. Gasper, in the person of whom we have an erudite scholar and eminent teacher. For the last 14 years, he has been a faculty of philosophy in various government colleges and universities in Kerala. He is presently working as an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy, Government College for Women, Trivandrum, Kerala University. The title of his PhD thesis is Otherness as Religion, a critical study based on the works of Jacques Derrida and Emmanuel Levinas. His postdoctoral study was on Sholu Nancy's phenomenological views on body and touch. He has had his studies in theology and journalism as well. His areas of academic interest are hermeneutics, phenomenology, aesthetics, philosophy of science, modern philosophy, and contemporary continental philosophy. He has published a number of articles in various international and national peer-reviewed journals and other publications. He has participated and presented papers in various international and national seminars and in academic sessions organized by reputed academic councils such as ICPR, ICHR, and UGC. There is a UGC project in his credit on Renaissance of Kerala. He has published 4 books, and the recent one published is in 2019, and it is titled Kadalinte Pariyayangal, a collection of philosophical essays. Today, he will speak on deconstruction, the revolutionary movement in philosophy and theory that has changed the way we perceive things, which is usually in binaries, challenged conventional understanding of texts, and questioned the verisimilitude of semantic systems and socio-cultural structures. Now, I extend a very warm and cordial welcome to Reverend Dr. K.J. Gasper to share with us his deliberations on deconstruction. I also welcome the participants from different parts of the country and abroad who are eagerly waiting to listen to this lecture. Over to you, dear Reverend Dr. Father K.J. Gasper.
Thank you very much, Father Dr. Teddy. It is inspiring that you talked something very well inspiring to me to speak on. So thank you very much. And from my part also, I welcome everyone to journey with me to discuss something related to deconstruction. Well, when Robin invited me, he said that, Gasper, this is the 7th lecture in a lecture series of webinar on Introduction to Philosophy. And since it is 7th, it must be the last one too. Then I pondered over his statement that this is the 7th day. And we know that biblically speaking, in the pericope of Genesis, we read that on 7th day, God rested. Then man begins his working. Now, I love to change that biblical statement into this type of sentence. When God rested on 7th day, Derrida begins his deconstruction. God constructed the world. Was it construction or creation? Well, when it becomes meaningful, it is a kind of construction. The edifice of a universe being constructed by God, and he saw that, or he or she, or they, we do not know exactly, but in Genesis, we see that God saw everything good. Then he retired for resting. Then Derrida begins his deconstruction. Well, I invite you all, let us together discuss something related to deconstruction. This is the most familiar word in the area of philosophy. When someone is trying to do philosophy, when someone is initiating oneself into doing philosophy, he or she cannot escape the notion of deconstruction, either for deconstruction or against deconstruction. Someone is always there in touch with this particular notion. Is it a notion? I do not know exactly whether it is a notion or a concept or something related to philosophy at all. Anyway, we shall try to see what does it mean, or what does it not meant, or what does it not mean. We shall see. I think in order to enter into the spirit of deconstruction, the very important thing is to do deconstruction instead of listening to it. So let us begin this session by doing an exercise. If you have some papers with you and a pen with you, try some words on the paper. I shall tell a story for you. Let me begin by telling you this story. This is a very short one. Actually, it is a paraphrasing of a story from Osho Rajneesh. I have no reason to select this story, but its brevity attracts me, and the selection is very random also. I shall read the story, then we shall speak about deconstruction in relation to it. We shall try to deconstruct the story in many ways, then slowly enter into the discussion of deconstruction. The story goes like this. Little boy Osho goes with his mother to a big, busy mall for purchasing some items. In mom's busy selecting and buying of things, in a distracted moment of her not paying attention to little Osho, he slowly moves to another corner where toys were collected for sale. Mom suddenly realizes that little Osho is not with her. She frantically searches everywhere for little Osho, but he is not found anywhere. She ran to inquiry, and thereafter an announcement was there in the mall. Little Osho's mother is waiting for you. Little Osho, please listen. Your mother is waiting for you. This is an announcement from inquiry. Little Osho surprisingly hears this announcement and speaks out a monologue. Oh, geez. I am not found again. I am not seen again. Alas, I found lost again. This is the story. So this is a meaningful story, actually. Little Osho and mom go to the mall, and he is lost in the busy schedule of the mom. Then frantically she announces, little Osho, come to inquiry, I am waiting for you. Then the monologue of little Osho that, oh, I am not seen again, I am not found again, and I found myself lost again. If this is meaningful, how deconstruction is functioning in it? This is my question. If someone is able to, I do not know the exact nature of this webinar series, whether the host would allow you to interrupt during the talk. If the host allows you, or at the closure of the, or at the initiation of our discussion, you can come with the deconstructed material of the story. But I shall point out certain words in it. Then I shall show you how this particular story is deconstructing itself. When little boy Osho goes with his mother to a very busy mall, big mall. Here we see that the little boy is protected. Little boy is protected by his mother. Little boy is protected by his mother. And a family, whether a single parent or a monogamous family, all these things are there. Legal status of the family is there. So the custodian of the little Osho is his mother. So he is, of course, a minor legally, and mom has the responsibility for the boy. But at a moment of distraction, she forgets her responsibility and Osho is lost. Osho is not seen there. But after realizing that her responsibility is shattered, she frantically goes to the inquiry and she uses the notion of public space there. The public space. The public space is the mall. We know that in public space, every citizen in a democratic setup, every citizen is free to communicate each other and every citizen is understanding each other. But the little Osho is here a minor and he has no responsibility to participate, or at the most or at the least, he has no particular freedom or right to participate in the public sphere speech because he is under the protection of his mother. But the mother is trying to get back her son by assuming that this particular announcement will be understood by the little Osho, and he is participating in the public sphere. We know public sphere is a famous philosophical notion by Jürgen Habermas. And here, mother, the society expect that little Osho at this juncture of a particular tragic situation, he will understand the announcement. And it is not the question of language, but it is the question of participating in a communication. Little Osho suddenly becomes an adult or a citizen, and it is assumed that he would understand. That means in a major structure of understanding of public space, the primary sense of the story is that the boy is under the protection of his mom, but when something occurs suddenly, some kind of disruption occurs that this little boy has the right in the public space, and he is also able to participating in the communication that is generally or mainly reserved for the seniors or citizens of the matured nature. What does it mean? When you can analyze this story, you can deconstruct its story in many other patterns as well. This is only an example that I love to show you at the outset of our discussion. I just show you how the very story involves in it the very activity of deconstruction, the very activity of deconstruction. In the story, in the main text of the story, we see that little boy Osho is a minor, but suddenly when something disrupts that particular monolithic or the assumed monolithic meaning of the situation, when it is disrupted by a tragic scene, when he is lost, then announcement comes that he is something to participate in the general public space where he can communicate with. That means a general understanding carries with it something opposite of that. Deconstruction is functioning everywhere. When I proceed with my discussion of deconstruction, I love to say that I use the word text here in the sense of experience. Any experience in my life is a text. It does not mean that a literature only is a text, no. When Amazon forest is burning, or when it is on fire, we know that now it is on fire, it is a text. When Babri Masjid verdict is pronounced by the special courts today, it is a text. And sometimes we are politically, we are religiously, we are ethically, we are disturbed. When we enter into that particular text, we see the dissident voices in that. We see the disagreements within that. Of course, there is a kind of monolithic meaning which is constructed there, but there are certain dissident voices which are slowly erupts out and makes its voices very clear to the forefront of the public sphere. So I invite your attention to some of the preliminary remarks regarding deconstruction. Can we define deconstruction actually? Can we define deconstruction? And before that, I would like to say that is deconstruction a particular philosophical phenomenon found by Derrida? Or is it always there in an event or in an experience or in a text? Is it always there, already there? Or is it by a particular invention by Derrida? This question we shall answer at the final question answer session of this particular lecture. So for Derrida, still we are connecting deconstruction with the name of Derrida. For Derrida, in spite of its appearances, deconstruction is not an analysis, nor a critique. It is not a method. It is not an act or an operation. Can we define deconstruction? This is the question. Can we define deconstruction? Well, Derrida himself has tried from 60s onwards, and for the last 60 years, when we search the history of Derrida's attempt to speak about deconstruction, there were different ventures from philosophers to define it. And what does it mean when we say that we try to define something? Can we define deconstruction? This is the question. Aristotle has given us a particular analysis or definition of the very activity of defining something. Aristotle states that when we try to define something, there must be three various aspects involved in it. There is a kind of, there is genus in it, and there is a situatedness of species, and also an element of differentia is to be added with that. Then only a definition is possible. What is a genus? For example, if I try to define human being, what is the genus of that? Well, living being may be, okay, a human being is a living being. That is a genus. There are different types of living beings. There are plants, animals, everything is there. Then the species is that this particular living being is an animal, maybe. Okay, when we try to define human being, we may say that it is a living animal, but there are other living animals as well. Then what is specific or what is differentiating human from other living animals? Then Aristotle, for example, states that humans' rationality, it is the differentiating aspect of human. Then by stating the genus, by indicating the species, and by pointing out the differentia aspect, human being is defined. If we follow this pattern of definition as it has been proposed by Aristotle, the question is, can we define deconstruction? Then Derrida himself says that we cannot define it as a kind of analysis or it is not a critique, or it is not a method or act or an operation. Why? Derrida says that deconstruction is not an analysis because the dismantling of this structure is not a regression toward a simple element, toward an indissoluble origin. And in his essay, Living on Borderlines, Derrida describes deconstruction as pass the method. It is a French phrase, pass the method. The word pass in French means both note and step. So this ambiguous phrase can be translated as not a method or a methodological step. Thus, deconstruction is simultaneously. When I use the word simultaneous, this is also very kind of problematic. At the same time, we know simultaneously means at the same time. This at the same timeness is very problematic in deconstruction. Deconstruction is, but still for the purpose we are trying to say that deconstruction is simultaneously not a method and a step in or towards a methodology. Rationally speaking, this is impossible. One cannot be at the same time a step and not a method. But Derrida argues that it is the nature of deconstruction. If I try to define deconstruction, it is a defeat in itself, or it is trying to undo itself. Because in every text, when the other voice is rescued from the prevalent or the prominent meaning construction, or the metaphysical, epistemological, veridical, and ethical connotations are dismantled, the other voices is heard, then naturally the other begins to play, other begins to overturn the binary opposites. We know, we are familiar with these notions, binary opposites, and Derrida just shows, see, this is how deconstruction is functioning. This is how deconstruction is functioning. When we listen to the that particular short story, then we know that there is a particular meaning in that. But when we listen to the other voices involved hitherto silent, when suddenly it disrupts or suddenly when it erupts out, then another kind of meaning is slowly evolving into the scene or slowly come to the fore. So when I try to define deconstruction, the problem with is that a particular meaning is highlighted in every definition. A particular kind of metaphysical presupposition, epistemological presupposition, ethical presupposition, metaphysical, ontological, or epistemology, all these words are very much prevalent in philosophical discussions. We know that. So a particular type of edifice of philosophizing is highlighted only when particular meaning is highlighted. So every definition is underlying a particular way of looking at the world. So if we apply deconstruction in a particular text, deconstruction itself cannot turn into a particular text. So deconstruction is not a text, therefore it is not definable. But still, there were attempts, in order to understand it, there were attempts in the history of philosophy. For example, Paul Deman gives a popular definition of deconstruction. He simply states that it is possible within text to frame a question or undo assertions made in the text by means of elements which are in the text, which frequently would be precisely structures that play off or double F of the rhetorical against grammatical elements. This is Paul Deman's very interesting definition given to deconstruction. Then John Kaputo, another very important Derridian scholar in the Derridian scholarship, John Kaputo defines deconstruction in the following way. I just caught. Whenever deconstruction finds a nutshell, a secure axiom, or a pithy maxim, the very idea of deconstruction is to crack it open, as if we have just cracked the story into open, and we found that suddenly little Osho begins to interact in the public sphere, and he begins to understand the conversations. He is a member, suddenly he becomes a member in the public sphere. He had got his own rights, and it is assumed that he also has, but since I am not able to play my video in this particular connection, I'm sorry, but I think you can hear me.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. So what I was saying that John D. Kaputo, he defines deconstruction in the following way. Whenever deconstruction finds a nutshell, a secure axiom, or a pithy maxim, the very idea is to crack it open and disturb this tranquility. So there is always a kind of disturbance that is caused by deconstruction, and the tranquility is disturbed. Indeed, that is a good rule of thumb in deconstruction. That is what deconstruction are all about. Its very meaning and its very mission, if it has any, is related to this particular disturbance of the tranquility. One might even say that cracking nutshells is what deconstruction is. In a nutshell, then he is interestingly state that, have you not run up against a paradox and an aporia? This is a very important word in connection with deconstruction, aporia. From overturning the meaning of a particular text, the particular meaning of a particular text, we do not enter into a new meaning. Rather, we are trying to unearth the metaphysical and the veridical and the epistemological roots from which this particular meaning is emerged. We just show that, we just exhibit that, oh, this is the condition based on this, based on which this particular meaning is constructed. Then there is naturally other possibilities are there. Other possibilities are there, and it is moving. Still, these possibilities are ready there to be opened up. So he says that, have we not run up against a paradox and an aporia? The paralysis and impossibility of an aporia is just what impels deconstruction, what rouses it out of bed in the morning. So Kaputo is trying to make things very clear, and as we all know, after 1960s, when Derrida tries to read, Derrida tries to apply deconstruction in texts, famous philosophical texts like Husserl's phenomenological discourses, or Plato's works on pharmakon, or Rousseau's work. In dissemination, he is engaging with Rousseau's work. So all these works were in the former phase of, or in the earlier phase of Derridian attempts of deconstruction. We see that there's a kind of epistemological leniency in Derrida. But when it comes to the latter phase, we see that there is a leniency towards the questions of religion, politics, justice, etc. From 1990 onwards, we can see this particular change in Derridian philosophical attempts. So we call such Derridian philosophical attempts as late Derridian. The phrase late Derridian is not an undebated classification of the literature that Derrida had produced as a prolific author. But still, for the academic purpose, many of the post-Derridian scholars and interpreters of Derrida considers the years between 94 and 2004 as later Derridian period in respect with the philosophical enterprises of him. Winter 2007 issue of Critical Enquiry is dedicated to Derrida. In this particular issue, as an introductory remark, W.J.T. Michel, he is the editor of that particular volume, Critical Enquiry of 2007 issue, he writes, in this period, that means in the later period, the so-called later period between 94-2004, in this period, Derrida published more new books, essays, and interviews than he had produced during his entire career up to that point, and many of them on important new concepts in ethics, politics, and religion. This later or final period in Derrida's life was marked by incredible productivity and of new terms that have yet to be digested in the way the earlier classic texts on difference, deconstruction, and grammatology have been. Later Derrida is the moment of moving to the borders of deconstruction, to the edges of the conditional, to the realm of the limit or the limitless, the unconditional and the unconditioned, the pure, the absolute, and the ideal. In short, the undeconstructible, to which he sometimes gave the name of justice. So this is a very interesting statement by Michel. He states that even though deconstruction is not aiming at come to a conclusion or a final meaning, he had always this particular leniency for a kind of purity of something. But the very contamination of origin was the question of deconstruction. That was the spirit of deconstruction at all. Whenever there is an experience, we feel that this particular experience or this particular event is originated, this particular event is originated in a very pure manner, but Derrida does not permit this particular standpoint. He states that, well, every origin or every particular event in its origin or in its meaningful context is contaminated by something that is not accessible to us. How it is happening, this is the question. So whenever we see that a meaningful context is there, we simply argue that, well, this meaning has been originated by this particular metaphysics. When I read a text, I feel that, well, this particular text has got its meaning from the origin of an author, or an author guarantees its meaning. So the very origin is situated in an author. But Derrida states that it does not begin there actually. The author, the concept of author is to be it is already contaminated, because the very words of an author or the very words that are uttered never give the whole meaningful context of that particular text. The author himself or herself, or the very presence of the author, is disrupted from the very origin. In that sense, Derrida states that the very origin of any context, the very guaranteeing of any context, any guaranteeing of any event is from its very inception is contaminated. But still, as we had heard now from Michel, that even though he is upholding this particular view of original contamination, Derrida had this particular leniency towards for a kind of for a kind of purity at the origin. We shall discuss these things when question answer session is open up. So in connection with deconstruction, he speaks about also difference. We are familiar with this word, the particular way of coining this particular word as a neologism. Derrida applies the word difference, and he introduces this word in his philosophical thinking. The very word difference is introduced by Derrida in his philosophical thinking in order to elaborate and explicate the claim of the deconstruction that the deconstructive operation of apparent oppositions is the only possible ground upon which metaphysics could ever claim to identify itself in the first place. Hence, deconstruction has to perform more than a seduction of the text. It is perhaps an entirely other question, because what is being spoken does not seem to belong to the old regime of discourse. Even if it does, one rarely is able to recognize its existence. Then how does then deconstruction uncover this hitherto unseen other? So if deconstruction is a kind of listening to the crying of the other, which is there already in the text, which is suppressed by the mainstream meaning and the question of the metaphysical origin or metaphysics of presence or logocentrism or phallocentrism. These various notions are there in order to explicate the original meaning of the text. Not the original meaning, but the origin of the meaning of the text. So Derrida argues that the meaning never ends in itself. It is differing in itself, and the meaning is deferred. So by implicating both these nuances of the word difference, differing and deferring. Differing is that we know when we flip through the pages of a dictionary, we know that when I say that, well, I want to know the meaning of the word text, for example, then I go through the pages of the dictionary, Cambridge, Oxford, Advanced Oxford Dictionary, etc., etc. Then I come across with the word text. There is a kind of explanation given, but there are plenty of words given as the explanation, and all these words are there waiting for getting the meaning. Then I slowly go to the words of that particular explanation of the word text, and it never ends. We are going through the meanings and meanings and meanings. So the meaning is always deferred and a kind of deferment. The meaning is always deferred also. It is placed somewhere, but it is not there. It is spaced and placed. It is a kind of spacing. The meaning, we never reach at the conclusion, or we never reach at the meaning per se. Meaning per se, we never reach there. So this is exactly the nuances that he speaks about when he speaks about the notion of difference. Then another word that is connected with deconstruction is the word supplement. Okay, the word supplement is taken from the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who presented it as an inessential extra added to something complete in itself. According to Derrida, Western thinking is characterized by the logic of supplementation, which is actually two apparently contradictory ideas. From one perspective, a supplement serves to enhance the presence of something which is already complete and self-sufficient. Thus, writing is the supplement of speech. Eve, in the book of Genesis, we see that Eve was the supplement of Adam, etc. But in Derrida's view, the Western idea of the supplement has within it the idea that a thing that has a supplement cannot be truly complete in itself. Well, when I say that every experience that I feel or I experience or I come over with today, for example, today is my birthday. I imagine that if today is my birthday, then this is an experience for me. But I know that I am not the author of that particular experience. Some kind of supplementarity is evident in that particular. Now I feel that today is my birthday, but this particular nowness is specially contaminated by the stories told by my parents, my friends. Okay, on that particular year and on that particular day you were born, then something happened, and these were the events related to it. And so a lot of narratives are there, as Paul Ricoeur has suggested it very clearly in 2000 when he writes about the conflicts of interpretations. He speaks about this narrative and time. So when I feel now that today is my birthday, then very event of birth is narrated by someone else. That is contaminated. I am not the author of my birthday, but someone else is there. Because when I recollect my memories, I know that the most previous memory that I can recollect in my life may be starting from my third or fourth year of my birth. Only when I am 3 or 4 years old, then only I can recollect some of the vague memories of my life. Then even before that, I was there. And my birth was narrated by others. And that narration is now intruded into this particular experience of my birthday of today, this nowness. And it is already contaminated. I am experiencing everything with a contamination from yesteryears and my expectations about the future. So the past and the future are mixed with the nowness. So when I say that I am the master, I am the rationale, I am the metaphysical presence, when I say that I understand totally and properly about this particular experience, then I am not listening to the supplementary voices of the yesteryears and the future years yet to come. This is how Derrida speaks about the messianic yet to come, the messianic yet to come. So every experience is disrupted by a kind of supplement. It is a kind of placing a door between the two rooms. When I see the door in my room, then I can ask, is it inside or outside? This is the question of supplementarity, actually. This is a new kind of logic. I can understand the logic of outside. I can understand the logic of the inside. But when I say that, when I ask the question, is the door outside or inside? I am in trouble because the door is not outside or inside. It is the supplementary item which makes meaningful the notions of outside and inside. And it is out of the context. And it is already there. At the same time, it is not within the borders of the meaning. The door is there and it creates the meaning. At the same time, as if a referee is controlling a game, we know. When a referee is running on the ground along with the players of a football game, actually he is not doing anything. He is running in vain and he is controlling the game. Everyone is playing and no one is noticing. Whenever he or she makes a mistake, only we see that, okay, the referee is already there. He or she is not a player in that, but he is a supplement in the game. In the same way, in every meaningful context, there is a kind of supplementarity that disrupts, that begins to disrupt the edifice of the meaning. And it questions the metaphysical or the epistemological presuppositions. As in the story that we told in the beginning, suddenly the public sphere enters. And it was there already, but we were not aware of that. The metaphysics of public sphere suddenly erupts out and tries to get the little Osho to the fore, and he begins to understand himself. But he says that I am lost again. And what is that thing? There are a lot of questions involved in that. Suddenly he becomes a rational being. Suddenly he becomes questioning himself. And even a psychoanalytic notion of self is working there. In his monologue, he says that, oh, geez, I am not found again. As if he is engaging with a kind of symbolic order or the mirror stage in the psychoanalytic tradition. His self is suddenly becomes something else. He is trying to meditate upon the original nature of his self or ego or the very notion of subjectivity. All these elements are involved in it. So it was so plain, and this particular meaningful context is suddenly disrupted by the supplementarity logic. And Derrida speaks about this supplementarity logic whenever he speaks or whenever he mentions about the deconstruction. So another important element that is involved in it is related to the notion of text, or the notion of the trace of a text, the notion of the trace of it. What is the trace of a text? The trace is, okay, as we had explained a little before, whenever there is an occurrence of a context, whenever there is an occurrence of an event, when it becomes a point or meaning in a rational structure, when everything is set meaningfully, we are satisfied about the meaning that is originated in it, and we congratulate ourselves that at last we get a particular meaning from this text. And suddenly we are tempted to see that, oh, some other items also are there that are not fit into this particular construct that we had prepared now. So I just try to pick out some elements that are not at all fit into this particular context. Then I say that something is lost, something is there. At the same time, I am not able to find out some traces there, the otherness, the otherly structured elements are there, and I can see the traces of them, but I am not able to pinpoint rightly what is that. I do not know. So I am not able to incarcerate. I am not able to incarcerate it into my structurality. I think we can understand this particular notion of trace by using the metaphor of a kind of statue. In order to, in sculpture, we know, in sculpture, in sculpting a particular statue, one is trying to remove the unnecessary elements from the stone or the wood out of which this particular statue is formed. In sculpture, we are not forming a statue, but we are just removing the so-called unnecessary elements from the statue. By removing the unnecessary elements only, a statue is formed automatically. We know that. So where the statue actually resides, or where actually the statue is it in the statue itself, or is it in the elements those were just removed from the stone or the wood out of which this particular statue is formed? Then Derrida would say that it is not the question of statue, but it is the question of the removed elements. In removed elements only we can see the form or the content of the statue. Okay, this particular statue is a beautiful, beautiful element. When we go to Milan, in the Cathedral of Milan, we see the statue of a man who has wearing his skin that has been unsheathed from his body, and he just wears his own skin. And when we see that, a man without skin, he is standing there, then we just ask the question, from where this particular statue is formed, the elements that are removed from the statue actually gives meaning to the this particular statue. That is why Porphyry, one of the prominent figures in ancient Greek philosophy, Porphyry states that do not retire yourselves from the attempt to sculpt yourselves in you. Do not retire from yourselves to sculpt yourselves within you or from you. So we are always trying to sculpt ourselves. We are always trying to form ourselves as a kind of meaningful text so that we can repeat ourselves. And we are removing the elements which are not fit into this particular meaning. There lies the trace. There lies the trace. So our nationality, our nation, our religion, our ways of looking at the world, our sciences, all these are sculptures like, and we have formed it. But there are other elements, the very important word, otherness. There are other elements which are neglected or which were not listened to or which were there in borderlines, but their shadow is over our meaning. The shadow is over there and they are crying. And we need a kind of ear to listen to. Deconstruction is a kind of deep listening as well. Deconstruction becomes a deep listening whenever we listen to the cries of the other. As it echoes in Levinas, when Derrida made a conversation, there were, I think, one of the most interesting aspect of Derridian philosophy is that he always engages with other philosophers as well in dialogue. He always engages with himself with other philosophers in dialogues. So Levinas was one of his most favorite writers. In Violence and Metaphysics, his celebrated essay, Violence and Metaphysics, he speaks about the otherness. Levinas had written a 4 to 5 pages article against some of the views expressed by Derrida, but Derrida replied with 100 pages as Violence and Metaphysics. And the question of otherness was, as we all know, very dear to Levinas. And in his later phase, Derrida was shown much interest in this aspect of, or in this experience of otherness. And also in his debate with J.L. Austin and John Seale in Analytic Philosophical Traditions, there also we see this the notion of otherness that are very, very importantly highlighted by Derrida. Well, so what I was trying to say is that deconstruction as a question or as a kind of deep listening to the otherness or the other nuances, those were already there in a particular text or in a particular event or in a particular experience. It is always in function. Deconstruction is always function in a text. And whenever we listen to that, it is always there, whether we agree with it or not, or whether we like it or not, whether we are interested in or not, whether we argue against it or not, it is always there. Because meaning can be constructed only by making something submissive, making something suppressed, making something else out there, by removing the binary opposite. We can speak about deconstruction. So what happens to this other? This is the question, the final question of the deconstruction. What happens to the other? What happens to the other? And Derrida would say, am I the custodian of my brother? As if he is echoing the Genesis question, the divine question asked against Cain after the murder. After the murder, the Cain is questioned by the divine. Where is your brother Abel? Where is your brother Abel? Then we know Jose Saramago has written a beautiful novel titled Cain. There's a long discussion between God and Cain. Then Cain asked this first irresponsible question to God. Am I the custodian of my brother? Then God becomes silent. And Derrida continues this question. And he's asking this question by propounding the notion of deconstruction. He's echoing actually this question. Am I the custodian of brother? Am I the custodian of my sister? Yes, you are. Because the meaning is always a kind of suppression of something else. Suppression of my brothers, suppression of my sisters, maybe. So this is, deconstruction is, in this sense, is political. Deconstruction is the question of justice. Deconstruction is the question of religion. That is why when I tried to study for my dissertation, I have coined the title as Otherness as Religion. Religare, religion. We know religion comes from the Latin root religare, which simply means to relate with. It is not my power to make a relation with it, but the other inaugurates this particular relation. The other inaugurates the relation with me. Other cries out that I am here. I am here. Me too. I am here. I am here always. But since we are deaf against the other, we do not listen to this particular cry. That is why it is a political question. That is why it is so. In 2000, before his death in 2004, Derrida was much interested in the questions of religion. Derrida was much interested in the questions of justice and hospitality. How this particular, the hospitality occurs was his very interesting. And the notion of gifting, by reading Marcel Mauss' text on gift, the problem of gifting or the myth of gifting, he was trying to explore the more ethical nuances and the religious nuances of the word deconstruction. So in this particular sense, Derrida presents deconstruction as the hospitality for the other, or meaning as the gifting, when a particular meaning is highlighted, it is a gift from the other. It is a gift from the other. And we thankfully receive that particular meaning. And when other comes, the hospitality is inaugurated. What is hospitality actually? We feel that we are the masters of the home. We are the masters of the home. And when a guest comes, he is in the house or in the home, and he or she is given the timetable of the home, and she is not given the freedom to act by oneself. Instead, he or she is constituted within the methods of the home, and we exhibit ourselves as the masters. But in hospitality, actually, there is a kind of disruption of the home, whenever a guest comes, the home is disrupted. The edifice of the home, the edifice of the meaning is disrupted. It is in the sense that Derrida speaks about hospitality, because we know the very word guest and host derives from the root Latin hoste, which has a connotation of enemy. This is a connotation. So in the notion of the guest, we find out its opposite of enemy. It is a kind of enemy. Enemy has a bad connotation, we know. But here, whenever I am there, waiting for the other to come, he or she comes to me by disrupting me. So I have no right to be there. I have no right to be there. I am disrupted. As a meaningful master, I am disrupted. So deconstruction thus raises the question of justice as well. Deconstruction is a question of justice. Deconstruction is a question of otherness. Deconstruction is a question of the sculpting of the meaning, and deconstruction is finally a question of the religion. So I think now everyone who is discussing this particular notion of deconstruction is dealing with these types of issues related to the Reidian explication of deconstruction. I think this much is enough as a lecture. Then we can carry on with our discussions. I think host, you can open the platform for question answer sessions and
yes,
further discussions. So thank you very much for your patient listening. Thank you. And also,
yes.
I'm sorry for the technical disruptions occurred during the lecture. I'm sorry.
No problem, sir. Thank you for your lecture. Now it's time for the Q&A sessions. Me and Sneha will be reading the questions simultaneously, one after the other. And then if you have any problem hearing the question, you can please request us to read again and we will do so. So shall I start with the first question?
Oh, sure. Please go.
Dan, 1 second. I think Josie sir has posted a very interesting take on the story that was delivered to us at the opening of the lecture. So maybe if you can ask Josie sir to join, because I think the speaker also expects this to be a little interactive. So maybe
Yes, sir, you can please join.
Josie sir, welcome.
Hello, sir. No, I was just being playful. I just gave a deconstructive reading to your Osho story. It's there for everyone to see. You want me to read it out, or Dan, you can read it out. No problem. You just read it out.
Yeah, please read it. Please read it.
Yes, I will read it out. 1 second.
Okay.
So this is the deconstructive reading of Osho's story from Josie sir. The little boy is Jesus. There's a whole lot of religious discourse, even semiotic mythology about such signifiers as Christmas, the infant Jesus, nativity, cradle, childhood in Nazareth, etc. The mother in the story is not Mary, the de jure mother, but the church, the de facto mother who owns, controls, possesses, and protects the child. Regarding the church as mother, brackets, with the faithful as her children, close bracket, is an important element of the familiar religious mythology. The public sphere is the community of believers with their rituals, rules, traditions, institutions, apparatuses, as well as capital, bracket, economic, symbolic, and cultural. Whenever Jesus, bracket, with all the values he stands for, close bracket, tries to wriggle out or steal away from the clutches of the church gets him back with the help of the believers and the infrastructure. The church will not grant Jesus any identity or existence outside its fold. So that's it.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. It's a theological.
I would love to get the response of a Catholic priest on this very playful.
Okay, this is a familiar way of reading the text, no? When Jesus, Mother Mary, and Joseph went to Jerusalem temple, and Jesus is not seen on the way, but he was in conversation. I am very much interested in his conversation with the masters of the day. He was just trying to deconstruct the religious notions of the day, no? But sometimes the Catholic Church or any other Christian denomination sometimes feel that they possess Jesus, the divine, Jesus, the man, altogether. But there is a kind of mysterious element which is always left, which is always lost, no? Which is always lost. Something else is to be there, to which we have to seek after. I think Nikos Kazantzakis has deconstructed this Jesus of church into a newer realm in his two novels. We are familiar with that. Christ Re-Crucified and Last Temptation of Christ. We are familiar, we all have read it also, I know. So is Jesus meaningfully fullness, the fullness of meaning, as fullness of meaning, is Jesus fully available to us? Is Jesus sacramentally fully available to us? Is Jesus theologically fully available to us? He's always there outside. We feel that in a public sphere, okay, 10% he is available to us. But he is always out there, yet to be deconstructed, yet to be in a context of gifting as meaning, yet to be waiting for the hospitable nature of disruption from our part. And in evangelical discourses, in Gospels, we see that whenever Jesus comes as a guest, that house is disrupted. When he visits the house of a tax collector, the whole wealth is lost. When Jesus visits the house of Bethany, the home of Bethany, Lazarus, Mary, Martha, their house is disrupted. Whenever Jesus visits as a guest, whenever he is there, the roof of the house is lost. That means it is not an easy task to get a visit. So
Jesus is deference.
Pardon me?
Jesus is deference. Derrida's term, deference.
Different.
The deference, the other.
Okay,
The immanent other.
Always the other.
Yeah.
But we are trying to reduce him into the self-sameness of our structure. Okay, very good and very interesting comment from Joshi sir. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Shall we continue with the other questions?
Oh, sure. Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. This question is from Dr. Vimal John. He's a professor from our department. He has asked, what seems to be the point of deconstruction? How would you respond to the charges that deconstruction is empty rhetoric and misdirection and trickery? Finally, what does it do to the notions of justice and ethics? Does it aid justice, or is it an impediment to justice? Or in the spirit of deconstruction, are these questions irrelevant? That's it.
Oh, very interesting question. Okay, it was always from the very 60s onwards. This question was raised against Derridian deconstructive reading, especially when he writes his books in experimental ways. For example, glass, the French word for death knell. He writes in a particular format that is not that much familiar to us. So the very neologisms he applied in his text, the way he tries to expound the notion of then there were popular and unpopular comments against him, that it is trickery, it is jargons are used, and nothing is positively given to us by this intellectual exercise, etc., etc., etc. But whatever be the criticism against deconstruction, I am not in favor of Derrida for his experiments in writing, but still, the points that he had raised philosophically are relevant even today. We believe that or consider that a particular context is meaningful. Well, but there is always a moment of disruption involved in it. If we are carefully listen to the text, if we are carefully examining the text, then we feel that a deconstructive element is in playing in that particular text. So we may dislike Derrida's ways of doing deconstruction, but we cannot deny the significance of it, especially when it comes into the question, as your question itself mentioned about the notion of justice. What is justice? Actually, in his writings titled Law and Justice, Context, History, etc., he deals with the nuances which are simultaneously linked to the law borders as well as its disruptions. So whenever we feel that justice is done in the light of a particular constitution of a country, or on the basis of a particular norms and regulations of a particular organization, there is always a point of disruption in it. The justice is sometimes denied to someone else. The justice is always, we feel that it is always there, but it has yet to come. The present day Indian context is sufficient for us to remind ourselves about the notion of justice and the deconstruction that is required in it. I think the style of Derrida may be a little bit odd, but the points that he tries to raise are still relevant. I feel so. Thank you very much for the question, sir. I do not know whether this is only a comment. These questions are to be discussed further and further. Okay.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Amrit. How does reconstruction function within post-structuralism to critically engage with structuralism?
Oh, that's very interesting. As we all know, structuralism, as it has been inaugurated by Jésus, Ferdinand de Jésus, the very structuring, especially linked to the question of language, the very structuring is founded on the presupposition of difference. We know the meaning is constructed within a structure by differing each other. For example, I sit on a chair, the meaning is constructed, okay, well, the meaning is constructed by differing itself from table. So there is a new ontology actually in structuralism. The word signifier or signified, the meaning, the word and the meaning are not directly connected, but by a detour of differences. By a detour of, whenever something is affirmed, everything else is denied. Spinoza had asserted that. In the same way, in a structure, a meaning is meaning, or an object becomes meaningful within the structure or within the system. So the problem is that there is a center, as Derrida would say, logocentrism, there is a center of reasoning for this structure. So as he had mentioned, as Derrida had mentioned, by pointing out in his notions of metaphysics of presence and logocentrism. Logos, we know, logos is rationale or reason. The reason is always there at the center to guarantee the general structure of a particular meaningful situation. Take, for example, you are reading a newspaper in the morning, and 22 pages of that particular day, and we know the news are selected. It is structured as a meaningful, and we simply believe that, oh, this is the news completely occurred yesterday. But now we are aware of the fact that there is a subbing editor there. He subs every news and he patterns it and he designs, and he is the center, logos. So in the same way, if language is a structure, and if there is our words are signifiers, and some kind of meaningful objects are there indicated as signifieds, So signifier, signified meaning is guaranteed by the reason of that particular linguistic structure. It is exactly against this logocentric view that in post-structuralism, the meaningful self or the meaningful center is dislocated by the post-structuralist position, whether it is by Derrida's deconstruction or Deleuze's question of difference, or Kristeva's language as a flow, or Lacan's semiotic, Lacan's symbolic order or mirror stage of psychoanalysis. All these post-structuralists, and I am doubtful whether these thinkers would agree that they are post-structuralists. It is historians of philosophy name them as post-structuralists, but they all are critical, or Foucault's archaeology or genealogy. All these post-structuralist positions are against or problematizes, more than against, it is problematizes the center of any kind of structure which is guaranteeing a particular meaning. So structuralism is, according to Derrida, and actually in Speech and Phenomena, in his famous work of grammatology, and of grammatology also he encounters the positions of Saussure, and in Speech and Phenomena, after Husserl's phenomenological explications, he begins to engage with Saussure, and in Margins of Philosophy also we can see that. He says that it is phonocentric and also it is logocentric. So this reason connected to logocentrism and connected to phonocentrism is also evident in Saussure's structuralism. So we have to deconstruct such a position, and in that sense, Derrida may be termed as a post-structuralist in the light of Saussurean signifier-signified structuring of the question of language. Okay.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Ruta Dharmadigari. She has asked, deconstruction can unmake meaning, and meaning making becomes another exercise in making a meaning to be further deconstructed. If the postmodern condition constructs this domino effect, to what purpose is deconstruction preferable to plain reader response?
Okay, okay, very interesting question. So the question is related to the notion of purpose. What is the purpose of deconstruction? If every time meaning is questioned, and if every time the meaning is displaced, then what is the purpose? That's the question. Unfortunately, every meaningful context is teleologically constituted. A telos or a purpose is always visioned only within a meaningful context. There is no inverted comma, there is no purpose or there is no telos in any questions of difference, because if at all there is a purpose, it is to waiting for the other to speak. So if we can speak about by using the notion of traditional philosophy, actually Derrida himself had argued that, or confessed, it is the proper way. Derrida confessed that though he is trying to do philosophy in a newer sense, unfortunately or fortunately, there is only weapons or there is only tools that are collected from the traditional ways of philosophizing. In that sense, if we adopt the notion of purpose or telos from our traditional way of speaking about deconstruction, if at all there is a purpose, that purpose is to listen to the other. So if the other begins to speak, and if it is meaningful to us, then the problem is that every time a rationality that tries to understand the other may differ in itself, and it is always a kind of awaiting for the other to come. So if there is a purpose, if there is a telos, that is just to listen to the other. And it never ends. There is no, grammatically speaking, there is no full stop in deconstruction. It is not eternal recurrence, as Nietzsche had argued. It is a waiting for the other. It is a waiting for the justice. And whenever, I think Homo sapiens, it is the verdict of the Homo sapiens to wait for the other. And unfortunately, we have cancelled by ourselves this waiting. And we feel that we need a meaning. And Derrida would call it as a kind of Babel way of looking at it. We need everything meaningful. But unfortunately, everything is not meaningful. That is the question. If everything is not meaningful to us, then naturally there will be the other conditions, or otherness will be there. And we have to patiently wait for that. And if that is the purpose, if we are able to call it as our purpose, then that is the telos of deconstruction, waiting for the other. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Dr. Ranjit KK. Does truth have any place in deconstruction? Is it relative or absolute?
Okay, these binary opposites are questioned by them. Relative and absolute. Only if there is relative, then only there is absolute. Only if there is absolute. These are binary opposites, we know. And relativism and skepticism are the main arguments against deconstruction. But it is unfortunate that deconstruction is not relativistic. Relativistic traditions are very interesting. They are paradoxical in nature. Let us just imagine how would a relativist position would define itself. Let us imagine that definition. Relativism may be defined as a position that no view is absolute. In that sense, this particular view of relativism is also not absolute. That means they are within the trap of them. They are within the trap which they had woven by themselves. But they had woven by themselves. They had woven a particular trap, and they are caught up in that. So relativism is very peripheral, actually. They simply say that in sophist period as well, when Socrates was trying to perform by his most, effective measure of thinking, Elenchus, he was fighting against the relativistic tendencies of the sophists. It is subjective position, actually. One who is viewing the meaning is subjective in nature. At the point of view of the viewer, the truth is calculated. This is the way of relativism, and that is very peripheral, actually. But deconstruction had always confronted with such criticisms. And when we look deeper into the functioning of deconstruction, we can see that okay, it aspires for the truths, but what kind of truths? Is it absolute? When we claim that some kind of truth is absolute, then naturally there is a kind of closure. That is the metaphysical older dreams, metaphysical dreams of the yesteryears, you know. So truth is always truth. There is no relative and absolute. Truth is always there, and we are traveling into that. Whether it is absolute or relative is our problem. Truth is there, and when it is finally revealed to us, we don't know, but we are patiently listening to the voices of the truth as well. If we need a definition at all, then truth is the other, or other is the truth. Okay, this is how I don't know whether I am whether I satisfy your question or not, but it's only a comment, and we are engaging in discussions only. We cannot give any kind of adjective to truths. That is why Mahatma Gandhi had stated that truth is God. He was holding the statement in his earlier years that God is truth. Now he turns it down and states that truth is God. Why? Because it is always there, and we are traveling into that. We are journeying into that. And we claim that we are trying to seek the absolute. What is this absolute? Is it a telos? Or is it the final meaning of all meanings? We don't know. Okay.
Thank you, sir. The next question is a two-part question. Is from Anupam Devnath. He has asked, can deconstruction be deconstructed? And isn't deconstruction a kind of construction too?
Yeah, we have a question that whenever we try to define deconstruction, it becomes a kind of constructed version. And Derrida himself, out of pressure from his colleagues and his philosophical engagements from others, he was compelled sometimes, or especially in his dialogues with other philosophers, in Positions, a book that is worth readable. In Positions, he tries to, there are at least two phases or three phases in Derrida, to define, trying to define deconstruction. And whenever there is a definition of deconstruction, naturally, it also is open for further clarifications. It's open for further deconstructions. And it is always open-ended. That is the very interesting factor about it. It is always open-ended, more than a fully flourished, finished project, as Habermas had called modernity as an incomplete project. It is always an incomplete project. We are there traveling with it. It is an incomplete project. If we adopt the metaphor used by Habermas about modernity or modernism as an incomplete project, deconstruction is a kind of incomplete project, and it is slowly moving ahead. I feel to answer, or I feel to comment on that question in this manner.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Sarjan. Sir, don't you think that deconstruction is a critical regimen which we can apprehend substantially only with supplements generated from Nietzsche, Lacan, Foucault?
Okay, Nietzsche, of course, when we consider these people, Nietzsche had a great influence, of course, great influence on Derrida. Then Lacan and Foucault, they were contemporaries, they were contemporaries of Derrida. And while Derrida was seeking an admission in École Supérieure in Paris, the historical aspects of these things, we can get a lot of online data from Google searching. These were contemporaries of, except Nietzsche, were contemporaries of Derrida. They all were, and when Foucault published his Order of Things, it is translated into English in a different way, actually, in French, from French. There was a dialogue, a kind of, so to say, a fierce dialogue between Foucault and Derrida, actually. And they were never friends again till his death.
Excuse me, sir. That's actually regarding Foucault's first work, the Madness and Civilization, actually.
Okay.
And Derrida's famous review of that work, Cogito, or the History of Madness.
Yes, thank you, sir. Okay, so it was about madness. Okay, I forgot the name. The Madness of Civilization, the birth of the prison, etc., etc. All these things were discussed by Derrida, and their friendship was not that much in what to say, till his death. It was okay, they were friends, but still they were engaged in a different connotations in their discussions about their philosophizing. Well, so all these philosophers were actually trying to look into the experiences of our lives. Though they worked differently, there was something that bonded them together. That is why in 90s, Helen Geziu, in her work, The Incorruptibles, she calls these thinkers as incorruptibles. And Derrida had written an essay on this particular word, incorruptible, taking it as a metonym. And he tries to explain the notion of incorruptible, which is used by Geziu, Helen Geziu, of mentioning about the intellectuals of the 1960s. So Foucault was there, Lacan, then of course Derrida. All these intellectuals were there, and they were influencing each other, but they had made their own ways in doing philosophy. And all these thinkers, the so-called post-structuralist thinkers, were heavily influenced by Nietzsche himself. We know the birth of the tragic from the time of its publication onwards. The whole text by Nietzsche had made great impact on these thinkers. Okay.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Kanshi Ram. He's asked, does deconstruction lead to semantic anarchy?
Well, the anarchical, okay, anarchy itself had got a sense maybe. And what else is not an anarchy? We feel that we have meanings in our custody. We know things. And when I feel suffering, when I feel pain, well, now we are in a context of Corona, and we do not know how to handle these things. And life itself is confronting with a kind of mystery. And it is so obvious and evident. And instead of calling it as anarchy, okay, anarchy maybe in our general discussions may have got a kind of bad nuance, but still, I love to see that word linked to the notion or linked to the experience of the mysterious nature of life, And we try to understand it. We try to understand it in our own ways, in our own lives, in terms of our own dislikes, in terms of our own likes, in terms of our own dislikes, etc., etc. And we wish to see the whole universe as a kind of cosmos. But there is always a kind of arche, there is always a kind of anarchical, there is always a kind of confusion. And is confusion a bad word? The complexities, the multiplicities of the life. As Nietzsche, as if the former question, in the former question we have mentioned about Nietzsche. So is it a play of Dionysian more than an Apollonian? Apollonian tendencies is always a kind of tendency for meaningful borders, but still there is music, but still there is dances, but still there is questions of disobediences. But so life is not a problem that is to be solved. Life is a mystery, and it is always open-ended. It is always disrupted, and there are sufferings. But still, we confront all these things, and we try to unearth more meanings in it. It is a kind of mine where we are trying to unearth the gems which are to come So in that sense, deconstruction is positive rather than deconstruction is negative in the general connotation of the word anarchy, maybe. I think I may approach this question in this manner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Girish C. His question is, regarding the critical comment on Derrida's leniency on the purity of origins in his late writings, is it a very limited reading based on the ethical or religious teleological process? Is this too a metaphysical craving for permanent origins and ends in texts?
Oh, okay. All these questions are very heavy actually, but still very important. I think the question of purity had been addressed in Derridian work on, if I am not correct, if I am not remembering it properly, please correct me. It is subject to correction. I think in monolingualism of the other, that he speaks about the French idioms. He loves for the purity of the language. Okay, it is connected with the history of his the torture that he faced in his childhood while he was a boy of the Jewish family in Algiers, and the bad experiences that he had confronted in the school, etc., etc. All these biographical elements are there when he addresses the question of monolingualism of the other. So he states that it is not a dream that man searches for, but in every linguistic context, there is a notion of purity actually. But this purity, and he is giving some examples also. I do not know exactly the French words that now I forgot that, but in French, there were certain idioms that cannot be translated into other languages, but that can be translated into French itself. So these idioms, by pointing out these linguistic idioms of the language within which he is working, which can be translated into the academic language of the French itself, he is locating the discussions on the purity, on the notion of the purity. Well, so there lies the question of translatability of something, as Walter Benjamin has written his famous essay on translation. We know what is the notion of this translatability. When we translate, it is not a question of translating from one language to another, but rather within the particular language itself, there is a question of translatability. There is the question of purity. He simply mentions about these things by indicating that in every kind of experience that is so unique to us, maybe a kind of a thought that is occurring within me, or an experience so particular and no one else is interrupted in that, or in a unique experience, even in a unique experience, whether it is linguistic or whatever it may be, there is a kind of a moment of nowness. There's a point of the very notion of new. There is a point of nowness is the exact word, nowness. There's a point of nowness which remains to be pure, but unfortunately we are late always. We never reach there. It is not an idea. It is not a kind of dream, but it is still there. We are able to diachronically, not simultaneously, whenever we go there, it disappears. But it's still, we know it is still there. We are too late there. So just examine. Derrida compels us, or Derrida asks us just to examine our unique experiences in life. What happened? How uncontaminated they are. But still, when we confront it with as a rational ego, it is simultaneously contaminated as well. So purity is not a dream or an absolute or not an idea, as if Plato had imagined a world of ideas. It is not that, but still it is there. But we are too late, and the time and space of that purity is diachronically situated. It is not synchronically to the rationale of the self, but it is diachronically situated. But still it is there. We are confronting with it in our day-to-day experiences. And just imagine the etymology of experience itself. There is a kind of exit. The very word experience derives from the Latin root experere. Perere is a kind of moving away or moving out. Ex, the very prefix of experience. In experience, the prefix ex, ex. Ex is always a kind of opening up. And there lies this notion of purity, and which is not a dream or which is not an idea, but rather it is fixed within the contaminated beginnings. Okay, it is origin actually. This is how Derrida is addressing this question. And I invite your attention to read this, his famous work, Monolingualism of the Other. Then you will get more clarifications on that question. Very good question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Muthukumar M. Is asked, when we say deconstruction is about rescuing the other, who does it? Is it the text itself or the human agency? Both the parties are authoritative. What is your take?
Oh, we are not rescuers of other. We are not. Of course, we are not. Because the other is deconstructing us, no? Then we are not there. We are not there to define other. No one is entitled us to rationally speak about the other. The very question of subjectivity or the very question of rational agency, the very question of responsibility as it is understood in the traditional ethical responsibility, all these notions are absent there. The other is deconstructing us. The other is there. We are not trying to rescue them, but the other is raising its own voice, and actually other is trying to rescue us from our limited scope. We are opened up by the other. When we are opened up, when we are bruised, that is the exact word maybe, when we are bruised by the gaze of the other, we are not there. Our space, our time, everything is dislocated. We are displaced. Then how can we be there as rational agents to take decisions? That is why Levinas had addressed this question, and later Derrida also adopted it from Levinas, that even before I realize myself as conscious ego, the other is there. That is why ethics is the first philosophy. It is in this sense that Levinas had written the famous article, Ethics as First Philosophy. Ethics as first philosophy. In this sense, it is not the ontological ethics of the traditional philosophizing, rather as ethical subjectivity, as ethical responsibility, as a response for the other, I am deconstructed. So, not as a rational agent, not as an activity initiated by a conscious ego, I am not standing there, but rather the very invitation from the other dislocates me. That may be a kind of a proper way of viewing the question of the other in Derrida. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Saurabh. The question is, deconstruction is the close and attentive reading of the text to see how the logic of supplement is at work in the text, especially the text which has a logocentric desire for pure presence, which Heidegger calls as the ontotheological tradition. Can it be applied to the post-deconstructive texts like the text of Irigaray, Kaputo, Spivak, etc., who remains aware of the deconstruction? By the same logic, is it also possible that certain ancient texts also avoids the desire for the logos like Nagarjuna, Sen, etc.?
Oh, it's a very heavy, it's a very long question, and the answer is implied in that. All these names, Irigaray, ancient Naga traditions. And there were studies also comparing deconstruction with Nagarjuna's or Bhartrihari's Vakyabadiyas, the linguistic structuring of, or how the meaning is produced. All these questions that are discussed in Vakyabadi of Bhartrihari or Nagarjuna's apoha, the notion of apoha, all these things, or Dinnagas positions on language or truth, all these things are discussed. And in your question, you yourself had stated correctly that all these post-deconstructive writers are aware of deconstruction. If at all they make their signature, if at all they make their signature in their attempt to profess something or to assert something, then they are aware that their text is also open for deconstruction. For example, when you go through the differences of sexuality, or the I forgot the title, it is subject to correction, by Lucy Irigaray, that an ethics of sexual difference. An ethics of sexual difference. In that, Irigaray is philosophically engaging the notion of vision and visibility, which had been discussed by Merleau-Ponty, phenomenology, Merleau-Ponty, and also Nancy, Jean-Luc Nancy. So when Lucy Irigaray speaks about the experience within the womb of a mother, the womb, the life of a womb, or the life within a womb, she is aware that she is engaging in a post-deconstructive way of looking at meanings. But still, finally, she says that no, this is exactly the meaning, is not the final sentence, but there is a kind of darkness, there is a kind of disruption, there is a kind of question of flesh that is opaque in nature. The light is not, the meaning is always related to the question of light also. The meaning is always related to the question of revelation also. But in a context of opacity, in a context of body and flesh, in Greek we call it sarx. There is a kind of impasse or impossibility, or a kind of resistance of meaning. They are aware of these things. But still, surprisingly, their texts also are read differently by the later writers. For example, Irigaray deconstructs the writings of Nancy. Then Derrida himself had deconstructed the writings of Nancy in his famous writing on touching, on Jean-Luc Nancy. It is a famous work by Derrida. In 2000, he writes about it before his death. So all these thinkers are aware of it. They are constructing, and they themselves are deconstructing. Butler or whoever it may be. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Since we have run out of time, we are forced to close our Q&A sessions. We have got several wonderful questions, and we ensure that all the unanswered questions will be forwarded to the speaker. And since, thank you, sir, for patiently answering all these questions. And since it is the end of our course, the participants are now encouraged, a few participants, if may, to be brief, and they're encouraged to give their feedback. So if the participants can raise their hands on Zoom, the host will unmute you and you can offer your feedback. So please feel free to do so.
Hello. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Dr. Saurabh Todoria. I'm from National Institute of Advanced Studies. And I must say, this is one of the most fascinating course I have ever attended on continental philosophy. Right from the very first lecture by Dr. Radha and Professor Sanil, Robin, and of course today, Professor Gaspers and others. So this has been really, I hardly we come across such a such a theoretically clear and a theoretically clear lecture. And especially I must thank organizers also, the way they have hosted and allowed all the participants to their questions and everything. So I'm very thankful, and I wish that we would have more of this in upcoming future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else?
Hello.
Hello, yes, you're audible.
Okay. I'm Muthukumar, and I work as an assistant professor in St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru. And about the program, it was very good and well organized. And we expect more, from PJ Thomas, sir. And we had some phenomenal sessions. It satisfies every audience, that is right from the postgraduate level to advanced, who is a person who is in the advanced period. So it satisfies everybody, and it was very rigorous, and the speakers were very helpful in understanding the concepts, philosophy, which is otherwise will be very difficult. So we need a kind of direction so that we can plunge into it by ourselves. So in that way, this course has given a direction to ourselves so that we can explore these philosophies in an autonomous manner. So it has equipped us. Thank you very much, and we expect a lot of program from SB College. And thank you, PJ Thomas, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We have a few more minutes. If there is anyone else who would like to talk, please feel free to do so.
Hello, good afternoon all. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. My name is Girish, working as an assistant professor in CKG College, Perambra, Calicut, Kerala. So actually, it has been a wonderful session for the last 7 days, dealing with many different concepts of philosophy and theory. It was a good experience. So it's my humble suggestions. I don't know whether we had many sessions like from deconstructions to Kantian philosophy, critical philosophy, hermeneutics, all those areas, even counter-enlightenment. But I don't know why certain areas like including gender studies or feminisms, subaltern literature, subaltern studies, or capitalistic or fascist narratives are excluded. I don't know whether, although these items, I mean, although these areas, particular areas like feminism or gender studies are embedded in almost all the discussion, even today, deconstruction, we had discussions on sexuality, rigor. Of course, that was there. But even when it's separate sessions on feminisms, radical feminism or French feminism, almost, it is not about the significance that I mean, but why certain philosophical or theoretical parts are excluded. That's my humble question. Maybe another session we can all have a discussions. Anyhow, I appreciate the department, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's time to wind up. I'm so sorry for all the others that wanted to speak. Now over to you, Sneha. We just have to wind it up with a few more things.
Yeah, now we've come to the end of this program. So I would like to invite our dear HOD, Professor PJ Thomas, to propose the word of thanks.
Yeah, hello friends. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
You are audible.
All right, thank you. It's very challenging to speak after a discourse on deconstruction, if not unfortunate. So anyway, I'm in that position. So I want to first of all thank Dr. Gasper for presenting such a short but beautiful take on Eliot. I'm sorry, on Derrida. as I said, people talk about slippages and etc. But I'm happy that he ended with the questions of politics and justice. So, well, the construction is like a cake, a piece of cake or a hot potato. People relish it at sometimes, or people just put it down. But I think Dr. Gasper has made it a beautiful piece of cake, and I'm happy and satisfied that most of you, in fact, all of you, relished that piece of cake. Now, it struck me that Dr. Gasper started with the analogy of 7 days, and I didn't know that, but it struck me also now that this is the 7th day, and in fact, this is the end and the beginning and the end in one sense. So, so it's a perfect number. So at the end of the 7th day, we are going to have, of course, a big relief and kind of a Sabbath in one sense. So that actually fits to our 7-day timing. Regarding some of the feedback I got, and in fact, I assure you that we will come up with a higher edition of this course, including other topics that some of the participants suggested. So we will definitely look into those, and I'm very happy that you gave that feedback. There are so many people to thank. In fact, initially when we planned this, as I said, we were skeptical. It's a time of pandemic, and who will be there to take philosophy in the time of pandemic? But I'm happy that so many of you took the time to go through all the processes of registering, being part of the WhatsApp group, and following the instructions, etc. So it's in a way a kind of cognitive generosity. So we are all very generous in this time of pandemic, and I really salute you, all the participants, distinguished. And I hear that most of you are PhD holders, researchers, faculty, experienced, researchers, and in a way that we are humbled that many of you turned up for this short-term course. And I thank you, salute you in the name of the department. And I again assure you that we will go for some follow-up program. Now, also about thanking so many people, I think in terms of thanking, I must have the strategy of brevity, which is the soul of gratefulness. And I don't think I can name everybody here because it's already late. So right from our manager, our principal, then my own colleagues in the department, and a lot of students. And in fact, what I want to interestingly note is that some of our teachers immediately became Berkelers, or like instant technicians, sitting behind or in front of the computer, controlling with whatever they have access to. They are not engineers, but they were able to, control the Zoom app and all that. So it has been a 7-day, incessant, continuous work. So I salute all of them. It was like a lot of hard work for everybody in the department. So I salute all the teachers, all the students, and also I salute the convener, Dr. Raju Sebastian, who has been meticulous in planning everything, Dr. Robin, and Dr. Biju, who also cooperated with us. And above all, as many of you said, that we had a variety of scholars speaking on a variety of topics. And so I really, in the name of you also, in their absence, because Derrida is talking of the absence. So in their absence, let us also salute them, because right from California to Toronto. So we had, scholars being very generous in spite of the poor connectivity and other issues. They were so generous in giving their knowledge to us. So in fact, I remember all of them with gratitude. And also the audience, they've been wonderful. And today it's a packed audience, and it was like 250 participants for a lecture on Derrida. It's really overwhelming in a way. It's odd and strange also in another sense, but I'm glad to know that so many people are interested in philosophy and Derrida and so on. And I salute all your goodwill and decision to be part of this. So if there are some missings in the program, the way it is conducted, please feel free to write them in your feedback form, And thank you all. Have rest, and let us meet again for another edition of philosophy later on. Thank you. If I missed out anyone, I apologize. But anyway, thank you so much for being part of this course. And it's a great end, a grand end to the 7-day week, discussion of philosophy. Thank you so much.